45 million years ago, the land that is now the Gobi Desert looked nothing like the world we know today. Dense subtropical forests stretched across much of Central Asia, nourished by broad river systems and shallow inland seas that have long since disappeared. The Himalayas had barely begun to rise. Warm moisture moved freely across the continent, and enormous mammals were pushing evolution into forms it has never attempted again. One of them left behind a single skull. It measures 83 centimeters long, which is about 33 inches. More than a century after it was discovered in Mongolia, science has never found another one. No complete skeleton, no second skull. Almost everything we know about the largest predatory mammal of its age comes from that single extraordinary fossil. Its closest living relatives are not wolves, bears, or big cats. They are hippos and whales, the same evolutionary lineage that would eventually send mammals into the ocean, first produced what may have been the most powerful land predator the world had ever seen. Then it disappeared, around 4 million years before the great extinction that transformed Asia's ecosystems. This giant vanished without leaving a clear explanation, a direct successor, or another specimen to tell us what happened. It was not alone. Sharing these forests was a 2-ton mammal whose skull had evolved into a giant resonating chamber, allowing its calls to travel for kilometers through the ancient canopy. At the same time, another quiet lineage was steadily expanding across the continent, one that would eventually give rise to the largest land mammals Earth has ever known. This was an Asia unlike anything alive today, a continent where mammals filled roles that no modern ecosystem can recreate, and where some of evolution's boldest experiments appeared only once before disappearing forever. In this exploration, we're uncovering the remarkable age when monsters ruled Asia, what made this forgotten world possible, and why the very forces that created these extraordinary animals ultimately ensured that none of them would survive. Before we begin, let me know in the comments, are you ending your day with this documentary or just getting started? And if you have not yet done so, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. It's free and it helps us a lot. Now let's step into the forests of Eocene Asia. Before any giant could leave its mark upon the landscape, the land itself had to become unusually generous. The stage for this forgotten age took shape during the Eocene epoch, stretching from about 56 million years ago until 34 million years ago. It belonged to the long interval after the dinosaurs had vanished, and long before the great ice ages transformed the planet. During these millions of years, mammals inherited opportunities that had once belonged to reptiles, and evolution explored possibilities with unusual freedom. Across Earth, average temperatures remained around 6 to 10 degrees Celsius higher than today, or about 43 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit warmer. Permanent ice had not yet settled across either pole. Forests spread into regions that now lie close to the Arctic, while climates usually associated with the tropics extended far beyond their modern limits. Warmth reached almost every corner of the globe, creating a planet whose living patterns differed profoundly from those of the present. Asia occupied a particularly favorable position within this greenhouse world. The mountain chain that would later become the Himalayas still stood far lower than today, leaving no towering wall to interrupt moisture carried inland by seasonal winds. Rain reached deep into the continent, feeding rivers that wandered across broad floodplains and sustaining wetlands over enormous distances. Shallow inland seas also covered portions of Central Asia, adding humidity to landscapes that would eventually become among the driest on Earth. This combination of warmth, water, and uninterrupted terrain formed an immense biological engine. Plant life flourished with extraordinary productivity, creating more food within each square kilometer than exists in comparable Asian environments today. Herds could expand without encountering major mountain barriers, while predators and scavengers followed those movements across connected habitats that stretched for immense distances. Energy flowed through these ecosystems with unusual abundance, allowing food webs to support animals of increasing size and growing specialization. Another influence had been gathering strength for millions of years. Roughly 20 million years had passed since the extinction that ended the age of the dinosaurs. During that span, mammal lineages diversified into forms that had never existed before. Small survivors became climbers, runners, swimmers, browsers, hunters, and scavengers. By the Eocene, those experiments had matured into their first great flowering, producing body designs and ecological roles that later ages would never fully repeat. Many of these lineages occupied neighboring habitats without the geographic divisions that shape modern ecosystems. Rivers connected forests instead of separating them. Expansive lowlands encouraged migration instead of isolation. New adaptations spread across immense territories, while competition steadily refined bodies, diets, and behavior. Evolution operated across a continent that remained unusually open, allowing successful designs to expand over remarkable distances. The world that emerged from these conditions carried its own distinctive rhythm. Greenhouse warmth, plentiful moisture, open landscapes, and millions of years of mammalian innovation combined into an environment where biological possibilities reached extraordinary heights. Every remarkable creature that would later appear grew from this foundation. The forests, rivers, and humid lowlands were more than scenery. They were the living framework that allowed an unmatched chapter of mammalian history to unfold, shaping a continent whose natural experiments have never been repeated. Among all the fossils ever uncovered from the Eocene of Asia, one discovery carries an unusual kind of weight. It consists of a single skull, resting for millions of years inside stone, until an expedition reached the Badlands of Inner Mongolia during the spring of 1923. When the surrounding rock was cleared away, the shape emerging from the sediment looked unlike anything the scientists expected to find. Even before careful study began, its proportions hinted that it belonged to an animal beyond ordinary comparison. The skull measured 83 centimeters long, which is about 33 feet, that is nearly 10 meters, and 56 centimeters wide. No known land predator, living or extinct, possessed a skull of greater size. Its breadth suggested tremendous jaw muscles, while its elongated snout carried an arrangement of teeth that resisted easy classification. After careful examination, the animal received the name Andrewsarchus mongoliensis. When the formal description appeared in 1924, it immediately entered scientific history as the largest terrestrial carnivorous mammal known at the time. Only the skull survived, leaving paleontologists to estimate the rest of the animal through comparison with related species. Those calculations suggest a body around 4 meters long, which is about 13 feet, standing about 1.8 meters at the shoulder, which is about 6 feet. Body mass may have ranged from roughly 800 kilograms to well above 1 metric ton. The resulting image resembles an immense bear in overall scale, although heavier through the torso and supported by anatomy unlike any bear alive today. Its teeth reveal an equally unusual story. Long canines occupied the front of the jaws, suited for gripping and delivering powerful bites. Behind them lay broad cheek teeth with thick surfaces capable of crushing hard material. This combination separated Andrewsarchus from predators equipped only for slicing flesh. Bone itself became part of the available food supply. Marrow, Mineral rich fragments and tissues protected within shattered skeletons could all be consumed after other hunters had stripped away softer meat. Such feeding ability offered access to energy unavailable to most competitors. A carcass abandoned by predators still contained nourishment locked inside heavy bones. Andrewsarchus possessed the equipment to reach those remaining resources, extending the usefulness of every successful hunt or fortunate discovery. In an ecosystem crowded with formidable mammals, this capability may have reduced direct competition while allowing one immense animal to survive on opportunities others could scarcely exploit. Yet every reconstruction reaches the same unavoidable boundary. No limb bones have ever been found. No vertebrae, ribs, or complete skeleton have appeared despite more than a century of continued exploration. Every proposal about its posture, movement, hunting style, or daily behavior rests upon that lone cranium, together with comparisons drawn from related mammals. Confidence gradually fades into informed interpretation wherever the missing bones should begin. Field notes from the original expedition capture another intriguing detail. Members of the discovery team initially argued over the animal's identity, with some wondering whether the skull belonged to a giant carnivore, while others saw features resembling those of an enormous prehistoric pig. That uncertainty reflected anatomy that crossed familiar boundaries, preserving within one fossil the first hint that the evolutionary story behind Andrewsarchus would prove far stranger than anyone imagined. Fossils sometimes change far more than a single family tree. They reshape the way an entire world is understood. Andrewsarchus became one of those rare discoveries because its greatest surprise was not its immense size or crushing bite. The deeper revelation emerged decades after its description, when careful comparisons revealed that this giant followed an ancestry few researchers had imagined. Although it lived as a formidable meat eater, Andrewsarchus belonged to the even-toed ungulates, the broad mammal group that also includes deer, pigs, camels, cattle, and hippopotamuses. At first glance, that relationship seems almost impossible to accept. Modern members of this branch are recognized for grazing, browsing, or omnivorous feeding, not for dominating other large mammals. The fossil record, however, preserves a period when evolutionary pathways remained far less settled than they appear today. More detailed anatomical studies eventually placed Andrewsarchus within a branch known as Cetanchodontomorpha. This lineage contains hippopotamuses together with the direct ancestors of whales. That placement means Andrewsarchus shared a closer evolutionary relationship with a blue whale than with a wolf, lion, or bear. The connection reaches back through shared ancestry long before whales entered the sea, reminding us that familiar modern categories often dissolve when traced deeply enough into Earth's history. Its appearance still resembled a powerful terrestrial predator because of convergent evolution. This process occurs when unrelated groups independently develop similar features after facing comparable environmental challenges. Large predators require strong jaws, effective teeth, sturdy skulls, and bodies capable of processing substantial amounts of flesh. Separate lineages may therefore arrive at remarkably similar solutions, even though their ancestors followed entirely different evolutionary routes. Andrewsarchus and later mammalian carnivores represent one of the clearest examples of this pattern. The Eocene provided fertile ground for such experimentation. Evolution had not yet settled into the clearer divisions recognized today between specialized herbivores and specialized predators. One branch of mammals could explore diets and body plans that later disappeared from its descendants. Within the same extended family that eventually produced river-dwelling hippopotamuses and fully aquatic whales, One remarkable lineage briefly occupied the highest levels of terrestrial predation before fading from existence. For roughly 50 years after its scientific description, Andrewsarchus remained classified among the mesonychids, an extinct group of hoofed carnivorous mammals whose skulls resembled its own. That interpretation appeared convincing because the outward similarities were striking. As new methods of comparative anatomy and additional fossil discoveries accumulated, researchers gradually recognized that those matching features reflected similar ecological pressures instead of close ancestry. The revision transformed nearly every discussion about the animal's place within Eocene ecosystems. This new understanding also changed how its evolutionary significance was viewed. Andrewsarchus no longer represented the culmination of a dedicated predator lineage stretching across countless generations. It became one remarkable branch, growing from a family tree whose other branches explored entirely different ways of life. One direction produced gigantic land hunters, another favored adaptable omnivores, and another continued changing until limbs became flippers and breathing mammals entered the oceans as whales. Among the closest confirmed relatives preserved in the fossil record are the entelodonts, heavily built mammals with broad skulls, powerful jaws, and flexible diets. They occupied many of the same Asian landscapes and shared several anatomical traits with Andrewsarchus. Their fossils provide valuable clues about movement, posture, and behavior that the solitary Andrewsarchus skull cannot preserve, allowing fragments from different branches of one extraordinary family to illuminate a vanished chapter of mammalian evolution. Close relatives do not always resemble one another in the ways we expect. Within the same broad branch of mammals that included Andrewsarchus lived another remarkable family whose fossils reveal a very different path through the Eocene landscape. These animals were the entelodonts, immense even-toed ungulates that combined formidable strength with extraordinary dietary flexibility. Their appearance earned them the informal nickname Hell Pigs, although they were far more complex than that dramatic label suggests. Entelodonts spread across Asia before expanding into Europe and North America, surviving from the Eocene well into the Oligocene. Among the best-known Asian representatives is Entelodon gobiensis, recovered from fossil deposits in Mongolia. It carried a deep barrel-shaped chest, a heavily built frame, and a massive head supported by a thick neck. Along the sides of its skull projected broad, bony flanges that widened the cheek region into a distinctive profile unlike that of any living mammal. The purpose of those flanges continues to invite careful discussion. Some researchers interpret them as display structures that helped individuals recognize members of their own species. Others suggest they reinforce the skull during violent confrontations between rivals. Another possibility is that they fulfilled several functions at once, serving as visual signals while also protecting the face during combat. The fossil evidence has not yet settled the question, leaving the skull itself to preserve several plausible stories. Its teeth, however, speak with greater clarity. Sharp front teeth could grip flesh, while broad, crushing teeth farther back handled hard materials with ease. Bones, roots, fruits, leaves, and tough vegetation all formed part of a menu that shifted with changing opportunities. Such flexibility allowed entelodonts to exploit resources unavailable to more specialized mammals. They could hunt when circumstances favored hunting, scavenge when carcasses appeared, and browse when plant foods became the easier choice. Some of the strongest evidence for their behavior comes directly from the bones of entelodonts themselves. Several fossil skulls preserve healed bite wounds whose spacing precisely matches entelodont teeth. These injuries reveal repeated combat between members of the same species. The animals survived impacts powerful enough to scar living bone, demonstrating resilience as well as aggression. Their contests likely determined access to mates, feeding areas, or favored territories along productive waterways. The overall body design reinforces that picture. Entelodonts possessed long, muscular bodies carried by relatively short, sturdy limbs. Their proportions favored strength over sustained speed, making them well suited for close range confrontation. A modern bear offers the nearest familiar comparison in general presence, although entelodonts followed their own unique evolutionary path and retained anatomy distinct from any living carnivore. Across the river systems of Eocene Asia, entelodonts almost certainly shared territory with Andrewsarchus. Both possessed crushing teeth capable of extracting nourishment from bone, and both would have been drawn toward carcasses, water sources, and the concentrations of herbivores gathering nearby. Their encounters may not always have ended in conflict, yet competition for the richest feeding opportunities would have been difficult to avoid. When two closely related giants depend upon similar resources, natural selection gradually encourages subtle differences that reduce direct overlap. One lineage may favor larger prey, another broader diets, another more efficient scavenging. Across countless generations, these small adjustments accumulate into increasingly specialized ways of life. The Entelodonts and Andrewsarchus illustrate that process with unusual clarity, revealing how competition itself became one of the creative forces shaping the extraordinary mammals of Eocene Asia. While immense hunters and formidable scavengers shaped one side of Eocene Asia, another giant traveled a very different path. Embolotherium moved through forests that still covered broad stretches of Mongolia and northern China during the late Eocene. It belonged to the Brontothers, a remarkable family of odd-toed mammals related through distant ancestry to modern rhinoceroses and horses. Their bodies followed familiar mammalian foundations, yet evolution carried them toward forms that have never appeared again. Brontothers combined enormous weight with unusually elaborate skull architecture. Thick limb bones supported broad chests, muscular shoulders, and heavy necks capable of carrying extraordinary heads. Among them, Embolotherium stood apart. Its name means battering ram beast, inspired by the striking bony projection extending forward from the top of its face. Unlike the horns of rhinoceroses or cattle, this structure formed through the fusion of the nasal and frontal bones into a broad, flattened crest. Nothing quite comparable exists among living mammals. An adult Embolotherium likely stood around 2.5 meters at the shoulder, which is about 8 feet, and weighed close to 2 metric tons. Its body exceeded the mass of a modern white rhinoceros by roughly twofold, while retaining surprisingly long limbs for such a heavily built herbivore. The overall silhouette conveyed strength without suggesting speed, an animal designed to browse steadily through productive forests where abundant vegetation removed any need for prolonged pursuit or rapid escape. For many years, researchers naturally assumed the great bony projection functioned primarily as a weapon. Detailed examination of fossil skulls gradually revealed a more intricate story. The crest was far from solid. Within it stretched an expansive hollow chamber connected directly to enlarged nasal passages. Instead of forming an exceptionally dense battering structure, much of the bone enclosed empty space that could influence the movement of sound through the skull. This internal arrangement transformed scientific interpretation. The broad chamber likely acted as a resonating cavity, deepening vocal calls produced within the nasal passages. Low-frequency sounds travel efficiently through wooded environments, bending around trunks and vegetation more successfully than higher-pitched calls. Across forests, where direct sight between herd members was frequently interrupted, powerful vocal communication offered a dependable way to maintain contact over considerable distances. The remarkable crest may have served as a living amplifier, allowing one individual to announce its presence far beyond the limits of ordinary mammalian voices. The same anatomy also carried evidence of physical conflict. Male skulls possessed substantially larger crests than those of females, suggesting a role in sexual display as well as communication. Several fossil specimens preserve healed fractures and impact damage across the front of the projection. Those injuries match repeated head-to-head collisions between rival males, indicating that the resonating structure also endured forceful contests during breeding competition. One adaptation fulfilled two demanding purposes without sacrificing either function, broadcasting identity across the forest while withstanding powerful blows during direct encounters. Its teeth completed the picture of an animal exquisitely matched to its surroundings. They remained low-crowned and specialized for processing tender leaves, soft shoots, fruits, and fresh browse. Tough grasses and coarse vegetation offered little nutritional value because the jaws lacked the grinding equipment needed for such foods. During the flourishing forests of the Eocene, this narrow preference posed no difficulty. Embolotherium thrived within a landscape that supplied exactly what its remarkable body had evolved to consume. Growth leaves a record that stone preserves with remarkable honesty. Layer by layer, fossils collected from Eocene deposits reveal bodies becoming larger across countless generations, until the difference between the earliest members of a lineage and their later descendants seems almost difficult to believe. Few mammal families demonstrate this transformation more clearly than the brontosaurs, whose history records one of the most dramatic increases in body size ever documented among land mammals. The earliest brontosaurs appearing during the opening part of the Eocene weighed less than 100 kilograms. Their bodies resembled those of sturdy browsing animals, no larger than a modern large dog. They occupied productive environments without dominating them through sheer mass. Their descendants, however, followed a strikingly different path. As millions of years passed, successive species became broader, taller, and heavier, each generation pushing beyond limits that earlier forms had never approached. By the late Eocene, giants such as Embolotherium and its relative Megacerops exceeded 4,000 kilograms in weight. That represents roughly a 40-fold increase in body mass achieved across about 20 million years. Such rapid enlargement stands among the clearest examples of sustained evolutionary expansion preserved within the mammalian fossil record. It was far more than simple growth. Entire skeletons changed in proportion, with thicker limb bones, stronger joints, expanded muscle attachments, and increasingly elaborate skulls, reflecting bodies built on a completely different scale. The fossil sequence shows this transformation unfolding unevenly. Long periods of moderate change gave way to intervals during the Middle Eocene, when body size increased much more rapidly. Those episodes correspond closely with the flourishing diversity of large mammalian predators appearing throughout the same ecosystems. As new hunters evolved greater strength, broader diets, and more efficient methods of exploiting prey, herbivores encountered mounting pressure to survive encounters that smaller ancestors might not have escaped. Natural selection responded generation after generation. Larger bodies became more difficult to overpower. Greater height improved awareness across vegetation. Increased weight discouraged attack from all but the strongest predators. Every successful adaptation altered the balance once again, encouraging carnivorous mammals to develop greater power, stronger jaws, and more specialized feeding strategies. Across immense spans of time, these reciprocal pressures accumulated into an evolutionary contest recorded directly within fossilized bone. Another striking development accompanied this enlargement. The characteristic bony horns of later brontothers appear comparatively suddenly in the fossil record. Asian deposits preserve these remarkable structures before similar forms become common elsewhere. Soon afterward, the horns diversified into an astonishing variety of shapes, widths, and projections. Such rapid anatomical experimentation reflects strong evolutionary pressure instead of gradual random change. Features associated with display, competition, and survival evolved swiftly as populations responded to shifting ecological demands. Asia served as the center of this remarkable expansion. The continent produced the largest known brontotheres and the most specialized members of the family before comparable giants appeared farther west in Europe or crossed ancient land connections into North America. Fossil discoveries repeatedly point toward Asia as the place where these evolutionary innovations first gained momentum before spreading outward across connected landscapes. Every step in this escalation depended upon conditions established much earlier. Productive vegetation supplied dependable energy. Broad habitats allowed populations to expand without severe geographic isolation. Animals dispersed freely, carrying successful adaptations across enormous distances. Those circumstances sustained an evolutionary acceleration unlike any before it. The same setting that nurtured towering herbivores, formidable predators, and extraordinary anatomical experiments also defined the limits of their success, for every expansion remained linked to an environment whose stability would not endure forever. Every thriving ecosystem carries more than one kind of hunter. Across the forests and river margins of Eocene Asia, another lineage pursued prey alongside Andrewsarchus and the entelodonts. These animals were the hyenodonts, a completely separate order of carnivorous mammals whose history unfolded independently from the ancestors of wolves, cats, or bears. Their bodies filled ecological roles that seem familiar today, although their evolutionary roots reached into an entirely different branch of the mammalian tree. Their name translates as hyena teeth, though the resemblance ends almost immediately. Hyenodonts shared no close relationship with living hyenas. The similarity emerged through convergent evolution, the process in which unrelated groups develop comparable features after confronting the same ecological demands. Powerful meat eaters benefit from sharp cutting teeth, and separate lineages arrived at nearly identical solutions despite following distinct evolutionary histories separated by millions of years. The most defining feature of a hyenodont lay at the back of its jaws. Instead of broad, crushing teeth suited for breaking bone or grinding plant material, the rear teeth formed long, blade-like edges that slid past one another with remarkable efficiency. They functioned much like a pair of shears, slicing flesh into manageable pieces with each closing bite. Bone crushing remained beyond their capabilities, and vegetation offered little nutritional value because their mouths lacked surfaces capable of processing it effectively. This specialization committed them almost entirely to fresh meat. Modern carnivores often display some flexibility when circumstances demand it, occasionally feeding on fruit, roots, or other available resources. Hyenodonts possessed far fewer alternatives. Their anatomy tied survival directly to the abundance of animal prey. Whenever healthy herbivore populations flourished, these predators prospered. Any sustained reduction in available prey immediately affected animals whose bodies had evolved for one narrow purpose. Asian species displayed an impressive range of sizes. The smallest approached the proportions of a modern fox, while the largest reached between 150 and 200 kilograms. Those heavier forms ranked among the principal predators of their environments, although they still remained noticeably smaller than the immense Andrewsarchus. Different body sizes likely reduce direct competition, allowing multiple hyenodont species to exploit prey of varying ages and proportions within the same landscapes. Fossils recovered from Mongolia preserve another valuable clue. Bones belonging to early rhinoceroses and brontosaurs carry tooth marks matching the distinctive cutting dentition of hyenodonts. Some of these herbivores outweighed the predators by several times, suggesting hunting strategies that relied upon surprise, cooperation, or repeated attacks directed toward vulnerable individuals. The fossils cannot reveal every detail of those encounters, yet they demonstrate that hyenodonts regularly fed upon animals considerably larger than themselves. Their skulls also preserve enlarged regions associated with the sense of smell when compared with overall brain size. Such anatomy points toward predators that relied heavily upon scent while moving through dense vegetation. Odors linger where sight is limited, allowing an experienced hunter to follow invisible trails left by passing herbivores across forest floors, muddy riverbanks, and shaded pathways woven between thick stands of vegetation. The hyenodonts survived beyond the close of the Eocene and continued into the Oligocene, although their fortunes gradually weakened across Asia. As forests retreated and herbivore communities became less abundant, dependable sources of meat declined with them. A lineage shaped almost entirely around efficient flesh consumption found fewer opportunities with each changing landscape, illustrating how extraordinary specialization can become increasingly difficult to sustain when the world itself begins to change. No predator existed in isolation across Eocene Asia. Every successful hunter shared its world with rivals shaped by different bodies, different feeding strategies, and different strengths. Together, they formed a predator guild, a community of large meat-eating mammals occupying the same landscapes while dividing the available resources among themselves. The complexity of this assembly stands among the most remarkable known from any terrestrial ecosystem, revealing a level of ecological organization rarely matched in Earth's history. At the highest end stood Andrewsarchus, whose immense jaws granted access to prey and skeletal remains beyond the abilities of almost every other mammal. Large hyenodonts occupied another role, relying upon cutting dentition and an exceptional sense of smell to pursue or ambush medium-sized herbivores. Entelodonts dominated through versatility, exploiting carcasses, defending productive water sources, and consuming almost anything with nutritional value. Mesonychids, another lineage of hoofed carnivorous mammals, remained active across more open landscapes where longer limbs allowed efficient travel over ground less favorable to heavier competitors. The coexistence of so many large predators within one region was extraordinary. Modern ecosystems containing several dominant hunters, such as the African savanna, are often regarded as exceptionally diverse. The Eocene communities of Asia appear to have supported an even more intricate arrangement. Several unrelated predator lineages occupied overlapping territories at the same time, each maintaining stable populations without eliminating the others. Such balance required continual adjustment across millions of years. A fundamental ecological principle helps explain this remarkable stability. Species occupying precisely the same niche cannot coexist indefinitely because each competes for identical resources. Eventually, one gains an advantage while the other declines. The long persistence of these Eocene predators therefore indicates that their roles became increasingly distinct. Natural selection favored individuals capable of exploiting opportunities overlooked by their competitors, gradually reducing direct overlap while preserving the richness of the entire community. Each lineage appears to have specialized accordingly. Andrewsarchus likely concentrated upon the largest prey and extracted nourishment from heavy bones after softer tissues disappeared. Hyenodonts focused on medium-sized animals through pursuit, ambush, or perhaps occasional cooperative behavior suggested by fossil evidence. Entelodonts excelled wherever confrontation determined access to carcasses or dependable water. Mesonychids probably ranged across open and partially wooded terrain, where lighter bodies and longer legs improved mobility beyond the preferred habitats of larger rivals. Mongolian fossil sites preserve tangible evidence that these predators sometimes converged upon the same meals. Bones belonging to large herbivores display tooth marks with distinctly different shapes, matching the dentition of multiple carnivorous mammals. One carcass, therefore, records the presence of several species feeding at different stages. Such discoveries suggest repeated contests over valuable food resources, including displacement, intimidation, and the theft of freshly acquired kills, behaviors observed among large predators in many modern ecosystems. Supporting this entire predator community required an enormous supply of herbivores. Fossil deposits confirm that such abundance existed. Brontothers, early rhinoceroses, and numerous ungulate lineages appear together in the same geological formations, many represented by large-bodied species. Their combined populations produced enough living biomass to sustain several competing predator lineages without exhausting the available prey base. Such ecological richness depended upon every level of the food web functioning together. Large carnivores occupy the highest position within that network, drawing energy ultimately produced by plants and transferred through countless herbivores. When forests gradually contracted near the close of the Eocene, those lower levels weakened first. The predator guild responded with equal sensitivity, reflecting the changing health of the ecosystem long before its greatest mammals finally disappeared. There are rare moments in Earth's history when countless evolutionary stories briefly converge. Around 40 million years ago, the Eocene arrived at one of those extraordinary intervals. Forests stretched across enormous portions of Asia. River systems reached exceptional size and stability, and warm conditions sustained an abundance of plant life capable of supporting immense populations of herbivores. Every level of the ecosystem drew strength from those foundations, allowing the long contest between hunters and grazers to reach its greatest expression. By this point, nearly every major lineage introduced across this landscape had approached its highest level of development. Bodies had grown larger, feeding strategies had become increasingly refined, and anatomical experiments that began millions of years earlier now stood fully expressed. The fossil record preserves this interval as a remarkable concentration of diversity, revealing multiple families of mammals flourishing together before environmental conditions began their gradual transformation. Somewhere within these forests walked Andrewsarchus during the middle of its evolutionary history. Only one skull survives from this entire chapter, suggesting that even during the height of its success, the animal may never have been numerous. Large apex predators rarely exist in great abundance because each individual requires immense territory and dependable access to food. Its rarity, therefore, reflects the structure of the ecosystem itself, where only a limited number of the largest hunters could be sustained at any one time. Across the same landscapes, Embolotherium and its Brontothera relatives reached their greatest diversity. Dozens of species occupied Asia and North America, displaying an astonishing variety of skull shapes, body proportions, and horn structures. Their remarkable increase in size had not yet completely ended, and successive generations continued expanding the boundaries of what a terrestrial herbivore could become. While productive forests supplied the resources needed to support such immense bodies, below the highest predator stood a layered community of hyenodonts, occupying nearly every remaining carnivorous role. Smaller species pursued modest prey, while larger forms challenged substantial herbivores and scavenged valuable carcasses. Their differing sizes reduced direct competition and allowed several closely related predators to occupy the same regions without exhausting identical resources. Each represented another specialized response to the opportunities created by a thriving ecosystem. Entelodonts also occupied the height of their success. Fossils recovered across Asia preserve evidence of repeated combat, territorial disputes, and intense competition among individuals. Their flexible diets, crushing teeth, and powerful bodies enabled them to dominate feeding sites and productive water sources throughout broad areas of connected habitat. They flourished because the surrounding environment continually produced enough food to sustain both conflict and survival on an impressive scale. Another lineage continued moving through these same forests with far less attention. Early hornless rhinoceroses remained comparatively modest in form, still changing across successive generations. They had not yet reached the extraordinary proportions or elaborate structures that later members of their family would display. Their evolutionary journey continued even while other giants occupied the center of this biological stage. Together, these animals reveal what an ecosystem operating near full biological capacity truly looked like. Every major niche contained specialists shaped by millions of years of competition. Herbivores explored the upper limits of body size. Predators refined increasingly distinct methods of securing food, and evolutionary innovation spread through interconnected populations without obvious restraint. Beneath this flourishing surface, however, the environmental conditions supporting such abundance had already begun their gradual shift. The forests still stood, the rivers still flowed, and life continued expanding toward its greatest complexity, even as the first subtle changes were preparing to reshape everything that followed. Amid the towering herbivores and dominant predators, another evolutionary story unfolded with far less spectacle. It did not depend upon elaborate horns, overwhelming aggression, or exceptional weaponry. Instead, it advanced through small, anatomical changes repeated across countless generations. While many celebrated lineages approached the height of their success, the ancestors of the giant hornless rhinoceroses continued moving along a steady upward path that showed little sign of slowing. The earliest known representative of this branch is Juicia, an Eocene browser that carried proportions closer to a modern horse than to the colossal descendants it would eventually produce. Its limbs remained comparatively slender. Its neck allowed access to vegetation above the reach of many neighboring herbivores, and its body occupied a modest place within forests already filled with far larger mammals. It shared these landscapes with Embolotherium, feeding lower in the vegetation, and with Andrews arcus, ranging along river corridors where herbivores regularly gathered. Although individual Juxia fossils differ in age, together they reveal a consistent pattern. Successively younger specimens display gradual increases in overall body size. No sudden leap transformed the lineage. Instead, each generation added a modest increment to the one before it. Viewed across millions of years, those small adjustments formed a clear evolutionary trajectory, demonstrating that this family was steadily expanding even while many surrounding species had already approached their ecological limits. A later member of the lineage, Ertinotherium, carried that progression much farther. Fossils recovered from late Eocene deposits in Mongolia, China, and Kazakhstan reveal an animal substantially larger than Jusha, supported by stronger limbs and equipped with a more elongated skull. One lower jaw measures about 71 centimeters, which is about 28 feet, preserving evidence of a browsing animal capable of handling greater amounts of vegetation than its earlier relatives. The teeth also reveal subtle but important changes that distinguished this lineage from several contemporary herbivores. Erdnotherium lived alongside Ambulotherium within the same late Eocene environments. Both achieved impressive size, yet they divided available food in different ways. Ambulotherium concentrated upon leaves and browse growing lower within the forest, while Ertinotherium extended its reach higher into the canopy, reducing direct competition despite sharing the same habitats. Vertical separation created ecological space where two immense herbivores could flourish together without depending upon identical resources. The distinction that ultimately mattered most appeared inside the mouth. Ertinotherium possessed teeth capable of processing vegetation that was slightly tougher than the preferred diet of Ambulotherium. The difference remained modest, almost insignificant when viewed during the height of the Eocene forests, where abundant, tender foliage satisfied both lineages. Yet evolution often preserves advantages too subtle to notice until environmental conditions begin shifting beyond familiar limits. As vegetation gradually changed, even a small increase in dietary flexibility became increasingly valuable. Plants that challenged one species could still provide nourishment for another, whose teeth tolerated greater resistance. Millions of years of parallel evolution had produced two giant herbivores sharing the same landscapes, separated by only narrow anatomical differences. Those differences carried little consequence during favorable times, yet they accumulated into contrasting levels of resilience. The lineage descending through Juxia and Ertinotherium continued beyond the flourishing world that had nurtured its rise. After the close of the Eocene reshaped Asian ecosystems, its surviving descendants expanded into ecological opportunities left vacant by disappearing giants. That continuing journey ultimately produced Paraceratherium, an immense hornless rhinoceros standing about 4.8 meters at the shoulder, which is about 16 feet, and weighing as much as 20 metric tons. It became the largest land mammal known from the fossil record, fulfilling a trajectory that had begun with far smaller ancestors long before the forests reached their greatest abundance. No single sunrise announced the close of the Eocene. The transformation began so gradually that no animal could have recognized it while living through it. Forests still stretched across broad landscapes, rivers continued carrying water through familiar valleys, and the great mammals followed paths inherited from generations before them. Yet the foundations supporting that world had already begun to shift, one small change settling upon another until the accumulated difference became impossible for the land itself to conceal. The earliest evidence appears within the rocks. Across several sedimentary basins in Asia, deposits dating to the later part of the Eocene preserve a gradual transition away from conditions that had remained stable for millions of years. Layers once dominated by sediments laid down in lakes and broad floodplains become increasingly mixed with material associated with drier environments. Windblown dust begins appearing where persistent moisture had previously governed deposition, marking the arrival of landscapes exposed more frequently to open air and seasonal dryness. This pattern did not emerge in one isolated basin. Comparable changes appear across widely separated regions, spreading from the northwestern interior toward the southeast. Such consistency reveals a continental reorganization rather than a local fluctuation. The atmosphere itself was changing the way moisture moved across Asia, redistributing rainfall over distances measured in hundreds of kilometers, which is about 62 miles, until regions that once remained dependable reservoirs of water experienced steadily declining precipitation. The source of this transformation lay beneath the surface. For millions of years, the Indian tectonic plate had continued pressing into Eurasia, lifting the land little by little. As elevations increased, they altered the movement of moisture carrying winds. Air masses rising over expanding highlands released much of their rainfall along southern slopes before continuing northward. Beyond those growing barriers, the continental interior gradually received less moisture than before, allowing drier conditions to spread across habitats that had once supported continuous forests. Within the lifetime of any individual animal, these differences would have been almost impossible to detect. One generation inherited a climate only slightly cooler than its parents had known, perhaps changing by little more than a fraction of 1 degree Celsius, or about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Rainfall declined by similarly modest amounts. Food remained available, rivers still flowed, and familiar migrations continued. Nothing suggested that the balance sustaining this remarkable ecosystem was slowly shifting beneath every passing generation. Across tens of thousands of generations, however, those tiny adjustments accumulated into profound ecological change. Dense subtropical forests gradually contracted from their outer margins as increasingly dry conditions favored more open vegetation. The transformation unfolded unevenly, advancing across the landscape through expanding patches rather than through one sudden event. Areas that had long supported continuous browsing habitat became separated by growing stretches of woodland and seasonal terrain. The first mammals to reveal this transition in the fossil record were the dietary specialists. Embolotherium and several other brontotheres possessed teeth best suited for soft leaves and tender forest vegetation. As those preferred plants occupied smaller ranges, the distribution of these herbivores contracted as well. Fossil deposits that once yielded abundant remains gradually preserved fewer individuals, reflecting populations withdrawing alongside the forests that had sustained them for millions of years. Predators responded in turn. Every apex hunter depended upon healthy herbivore populations below it, and those populations drew their strength from the vegetation covering the land. As forests became less extensive, the food web supporting the remarkable predator guild began losing resilience. The first cracks in the Eocene world, therefore, appeared long before its greatest mammals vanished, preserved not in sudden catastrophe, but within the patient rhythm of stone recording a continent learning to become different. Some absences speak as clearly as fossils. After millions of years of occupying the highest place within its ecosystem, Andrewsarchus reaches a point where the record simply ends. Its remains disappear from Asian deposits dating to roughly 38 million years ago. That moment arrives about 4 million years before the climatic upheaval, marking the close of the Eocene, placing its disappearance well outside the great environmental transition that followed. This timing creates one of the most intriguing puzzles in Cenozoic paleontology. If Andrewsarchus had survived until the final stages of the Eocene, its extinction could be linked directly to the widespread ecological disruption already documented across Asia. Instead, the chronology tells a different story. The largest known terrestrial carnivorous mammal had already vanished while much of the broader ecosystem still persisted. Whatever removed, it began working long before the final transformation reached its greatest intensity. That 4 million year interval eliminates the end of the Eocene climatic deterioration as the immediate cause. A different sequence of events must explain why this remarkable predator disappeared ahead of so many contemporaries. Although no complete answer survives, the changing landscapes described by the geological record provide several clues that fit the available evidence more closely than any sudden catastrophe. As forests gradually became less continuous, herbivore populations also changed their distribution. Dense concentrations of browsing mammals became increasingly fragmented across broader stretches of land. A predator built around overwhelming power and the efficient processing of large carcasses would have encountered fewer opportunities to exploit the resources for which its anatomy had evolved. Hunting strategies successful within extensive forest habitats may have become progressively less effective as vegetation opened and prey dispersed across wider areas. Other carnivores may also have gained an advantage during this transition. Hyenodonts possessed bodies better suited for pursuing prey through a broader range of terrain, while relying upon highly developed senses of smell to locate animals over greater distances. Their specialized dentition remained effective wherever meat could be obtained, whether through hunting or scavenging. As habitats shifted, these adaptable predators may have competed more successfully for increasingly limited prey without ever matching the immense size of Andrewsarchus itself. Perhaps the most revealing detail appears after Andrewsarchus disappears. No equally massive bone processing predator emerges to occupy the ecological position it once held. Asian fossil deposits preserve many impressive carnivores after its extinction, yet none display the same combination of extraordinary size and crushing adaptations. The vacancy remained unfilled, suggesting that the environment no longer rewarded the evolution of another animal built for that particular way of life. This absence carries greater significance than the extinction alone. Evolution repeatedly produces replacement species when ecological opportunities remain available. Here, the opportunity itself seems to have faded alongside the changing landscape. The disappearance, therefore, reflects the loss of an entire ecological role rather than the defeat of one species by a superior competitor. As forests became less extensive and food webs simplified, the need for such an immense apex predator gradually dissolved. Everything known with certainty about Andrewsarchus ultimately rests upon a single skull. From that solitary discovery emerges the image of a predator that may have dominated Asian ecosystems for millions of years before fading from the record without descendants capable of inheriting its place. The fossils preserve no final encounter, no dramatic ending, and no unmistakable explanation. They leave only one remarkable specimen followed by an enduring gap where the greatest land hunter of its age once belonged and where no equivalent ever appeared again. Every long chapter in Earth's history is separated by boundaries that appear almost ordinary when traced across a rock face. A narrow band of sediment marks the passage from one age into another. Yet that modest line can represent changes beyond anything visible within a single lifetime. Around 34 million years ago, one such boundary emerged. Since the asteroid impact that ended the age of the dinosaurs, no climatic reorganization had reshaped the planet on a comparable ecological scale. The driving force lay far from the forests of Asia. South America and Antarctica continued drifting apart until a deep marine passage connected the surrounding oceans. Water could now circulate completely around Antarctica without interruption from continental land masses. This newly established circumpolar current isolated the southern continent from warmer tropical waters, allowing temperatures there to decline steadily. Ice accumulated year after year until Antarctica supported its first permanent continental ice sheet. That growing reservoir of ice altered the balance of the entire planet. Global temperatures fell. Sea levels declined as enormous volumes of water became locked within expanding glaciers, and atmospheric circulation adjusted to the cooler world. Moisture systems that had nourished the interior of Asia weakened substantially. Regions that once received dependable rainfall experienced increasingly dry conditions, while some landscapes lost the climatic patterns that had sustained forests for millions of years. European paleontologists recognized this interval by the name Grand Coupure, meaning the Great Break. Fossil sequences reveal an unmistakable division across the boundary. Mammal communities flourishing below the dividing layer almost entirely disappear above it, replaced by different groups adapted to changing conditions. Very few species cross that threshold unchanged, making the transition one of the clearest biological turning points preserved within the Cenozoic record. Across Asia, paleontologists describe an equivalent transformation known as the Mongolian remodeling. Fossil sites distributed through Mongolia and northern China record the same broad pattern at approximately the same geological horizon. Vegetation changed alongside mammal communities, while climatic indicators preserved within sediments reveal increasingly dry environments. Independent lines of evidence, therefore, converge upon the same conclusion, showing that ecosystems across much of the continent reorganized during the same interval. The contrast between life before and after the boundary is striking. Deposits below it contain abundant remains of large herbivores closely associated with extensive forests, accompanied by the specialized predators that depended upon them. Above the boundary, those giants become uncommon or disappear entirely. Smaller rodents, adaptable browsing mammals, and species capable of exploiting a wider variety of food resources become increasingly prominent. The ecological framework supporting the previous 20 million years had given way to another organized around greater flexibility. Measured against the immense scale of geological time, this replacement unfolded with surprising speed. Evidence suggests that much of the transition occurred within only a few 100,000 years. Such an interval appears lengthy from a human perspective, yet it represents only a brief moment for evolution. Large, specialized mammals reproduce slowly, requiring many generations before natural selection can reshape complex anatomy. Environmental change, therefore, advanced faster than many established lineages could respond. The boundary preserved in these rocks records more than a shift in temperature or rainfall. It marks the conclusion of an evolutionary experiment that had encouraged extraordinary diversity, immense body size, and intricate ecological relationships across Eocene Asia. Every lineage reaching that threshold encountered conditions unlike those under which it had evolved. Some possessed enough flexibility to continue into the next age. Others remained inseparable from the vanished world that had first given them life. The rocks preserve some endings with astonishing clarity. Across the boundary separating the Eocene from the Oligocene, one family that had flourished across immense stretches of the northern hemisphere simply vanishes. Embolotherium and its brontothere relatives represented by dozens of species distributed through Asia and North America, disappear with a completeness rarely matched anywhere in the mammalian fossil record. Below the boundary, they are familiar members of thriving ecosystems. Above it, they are absent. This disappearance stands out because it lacks the prolonged fading often seen in other extinct groups. Late Eocene deposits contain abundant Brontothera remains, showing healthy populations occupying broad geographic ranges. Early Oligocene formations reveal an entirely different picture. Paleontologists searching those younger sediments have recovered no surviving representatives. The transition appears so abrupt that the boundary itself serves almost like the closing page of an evolutionary chapter that had endured for millions of years. The reason for this outcome is unusually well understood. Brontothers possessed low-crowned teeth shaped for browsing soft leaves, tender shoots, and forest vegetation that had dominated their environment throughout their history. Those dental adaptations performed exceptionally well while such plants remained plentiful, as expanding dry conditions encouraged harder, more abrasive vegetation. However, the same teeth became increasingly unsuitable. The animals could not efficiently process the foods replacing the forests upon which they depended. Their immense size intensified the problem. Evolution had steadily enlarged these herbivores until some weighed between 2 and 4 metric tons. Such enormous bodies required substantial amounts of food every day merely to maintain normal metabolism. A specialist capable of eating only limited plant types faced an increasingly difficult balance once preferred vegetation became scarce. Smaller mammals with broader diets could survive on resources scattered across changing landscapes, while giant browsers exhausted available food more rapidly. Unlike gradual evolutionary transitions preserved elsewhere, the Brontothera record offers little indication of shrinking body size or steadily declining diversity before the boundary. Their disappearance reflects environmental change unfolding more rapidly than natural selection could reshape a lineage already committed to a highly specialized way of life. Evolution functions through accumulated generations, yet climates can reorganize on timescales too brief for complex anatomical systems to adjust. The interval separating abundance from absence, therefore, remained surprisingly short in geological terms. Every distinctive feature that had once contributed to Brontothers' success belonged to the forests that nurtured them. Embolotherium carried its remarkable hollow cranial structure through habitats where vocal communication could travel among browsing groups separated by dense vegetation. Its towering body allowed efficient feeding within the layers of foliage it had evolved to exploit. These characteristics remained extraordinary achievements of evolution, although none provided meaningful advantages once the supporting environment contracted beyond recognition. Their extinction created one of the largest ecological vacancies of the age. Across 2 continents, giant forest browsers, performing the role of dominant megaherbivores, disappeared within the same broad interval. No immediate replacement assumed that position. Ecosystems continued functioning, yet they did so without the immense animals that had shaped vegetation, dispersed seeds, and influenced countless interactions through their constant movement across productive landscapes. The history of the Brontothers therefore carries a lesson grounded entirely in natural history. Their disappearance did not result from flawed evolution or biological weakness. They represented an exceptionally successful solution to conditions that had remained favorable across millions of years. When those conditions changed with unusual speed, the very adaptations that had once supported extraordinary prosperity could no longer sustain survival. Their extinction records the passing of a world for which they had been exquisitely designed, a world that vanished before they could become anything else. Extinction does not always arrive as a single moment. Some lineages vanish almost instantly in the geological record, while others continue through changing worlds, growing less diverse with each passing interval until they eventually disappear from one region after another. The hyenodonts followed this second path. Their history did not end at the Eocene and Oligocene boundary. Yet in Asia, the age of their dominance had already begun to recede. Early Oligocene fossil deposits still preserve members of this remarkable predator lineage. Their presence demonstrates that the climatic reorganization did not eliminate them outright. Beyond Asia, several branches continued thriving for much longer, especially across parts of Africa, where suitable habitats remained available. Their persistence reveals that the family itself retained considerable evolutionary potential. The challenge lay not within the animals alone, but within the changing ecological character of the Asian continent. As millions of years passed, Asian hyenodonts became progressively less diverse. Fewer species occupied the fossil record, their average body size declined, and their geographic distribution narrowed. Regions that had once supported multiple forms gradually preserved only scattered representatives. Each reduction reflected another step in a prolonged contraction rather than an abrupt collapse. Their disappearance unfolded through successive ecological adjustments that accumulated across immense spans of time. The specialized dentition that had once defined their success increasingly limited their options. Blade-like teeth designed for slicing flesh remained extraordinarily efficient when prey animals were abundant and varied. They offered little flexibility, however, when food resources became less predictable. Unlike mammals capable of supplementing their diet with tougher plant material or a wider range of foods, hyenodonts remained committed almost entirely to meat. That commitment became increasingly difficult to sustain as familiar prey communities disappeared. Many of the large browsing mammals that had shaped earlier food webs no longer occupied the recovering landscapes of Asia. Their replacements tended to be smaller, more agile, and distributed across increasingly open habitats instead of concentrated within continuous forests. Predators, adapted to pursuing prey through dense vegetation, encountered new challenges in environments where speed, endurance, and behavioral flexibility became more valuable than before. Ecological relationships built across millions of years gradually dissolved as both hunters and herbivores adjusted to transformed surroundings. Another group of predators entered this changing world with different advantages. The mammals belonging to the order that would later produce wolves, cats, bears, and many other familiar carnivores had remained comparatively minor members of Eocene ecosystems. Their diversity and ecological influence expanded after the boundary because many possessed broader diets, adaptable hunting behaviors, and body plans well suited to increasingly open landscapes. Conditions that had once favored highly specialized predators now rewarded versatility instead. Competition, therefore, unfolded across countless generations rather than through dramatic confrontation. Habitat by habitat, adaptable carnivorans expanded into ecological opportunities, while hyenodont populations continued shrinking. No single event explains this transition. It emerged from repeated episodes of differential survival as environmental conditions consistently favored flexible feeding strategies over strict specialization. Evolution slowly redistributed ecological roles until the balance that had characterized the Eocene no longer remained. The eventual disappearance of hyenodonts from Asia marked more than the loss of one predator lineage. Their departure represented the final unraveling of the intricate predator community that had once flourished within Eocene ecosystems. The layered structure of specialized hunters, each occupying a distinct ecological position, gradually gave way to a simpler arrangement shaped by different climatic realities and different evolutionary priorities. Long after the forests had contracted and many giant herbivores had vanished, the fading of the hyenodonts completed the dissolution of one of the most elaborate terrestrial predator communities the planet had ever sustained. One lineage crossed the great boundary carrying only a slight advantage, almost invisible when measured against the immense changes unfolding around it. That modest difference had accumulated across millions of years, preserved within teeth capable of handling a somewhat broader range of vegetation. When so many giants disappeared, the descendants of Ertinotherium found themselves entering landscapes where competition had been transformed. The path that had begun with comparatively modest browsers now continued without the towering neighbors that had once shared the forests. Freed from those former constraints, the hornless rhinoceros lineage continued the steady enlargement already visible before the climatic transition. Across the Oligocene, that long evolutionary trajectory reached its greatest expression in Paraceratherium, the largest land mammal ever known. Adults stood about 4.8 meters at the shoulder, which is about 16 feet, stretched as much as 7 meters in body length, which is about 23 feet, and weighed between 15 and 20 metric tons. No terrestrial mammal before or since has matched those dimensions. Its distribution reflected success rather than retreat. Fossils reveal an animal ranging across Central Asia, China, Pakistan, and extending westward into Eastern Europe. Instead of surviving only within isolated refuges, Paraceratherium expanded into territories opened by the disappearance of earlier megaherbivores. Ecosystems reshaped by the end of the Eocene offered ecological opportunities unavailable, while numerous giant browsing lineages had occupied the same environments. The hornless rhinoceros lineage spread into those vacancies with remarkable effectiveness. Its exceptional height provided a decisive ecological advantage. Standing 16 feet, which is about 4.8 meters, above the ground at the shoulder, Paraceratherium reached foliage unavailable to every other land mammal sharing its habitats. Branches growing high above ordinary browsing levels remained accessible even where lower vegetation became increasingly limited. That vertical separation reduced competition while allowing immense quantities of food to remain available in forests still capable of supporting such extraordinary animals. Its enormous body also carried another consequence. At 15 to 20 metric tons, Paraceratherium exceeded the practical hunting capacity of every known Oligocene carnivore. Juveniles undoubtedly faced risks during their earliest years, yet a healthy adult possessed size alone as an extraordinary defense. Predators capable of challenging smaller herbivores could not realistically overpower a fully grown individual. For much of its existence, this giant moved through its environment without any natural enemy able to threaten mature animals directly. For approximately 11 million years following the ecological reorganization that had eliminated nearly every other Eocene giant, Paraceratherium continued walking across Asia. It carried forward anatomical trends established long before the forests began contracting, representing the continuation of an evolutionary direction already visible in Juxia and Ertinotherium. Its existence linked two different worlds, originating from ecological conditions that no longer existed while thriving within landscapes reshaped by profound climatic change. Even this remarkable lineage remained connected to the forests from which it had arisen. During the later part of the Oligocene, continued global cooling encouraged the expansion of increasingly open habitats and the spread of grass dominated environments across many regions. Forests supporting abundant high browse became progressively less extensive. The immense browser once again encountered shrinking food resources, although this transformation unfolded across a longer interval than the abrupt transition marking the end of the Eocene. Paraceratherium therefore stands as the final expression of an evolutionary story that began long before the Great Boundary. It was more than a survivor lingering after catastrophe. It represented the ultimate achievement of a lineage shaped by Eocene conditions, delivered into a different age and sustained only while enough forest remained to nourish the towering browser that history had patiently assembled across millions of years. An ecosystem is defined as much by the work performed within it as by the creatures that inhabit it. When the great mammals of the Eocene disappeared, they carried away ecological roles that had shaped forests for roughly 20 million years. The landscapes that entered the Oligocene remained full of life, yet they functioned according to a different pattern. New communities developed around opportunities that no longer resembled those of the age before them. Among the greatest losses was the disappearance of the immense forest browsers. Embolotherium and numerous other brontotheres had consumed leaves growing well above the reach of smaller herbivores, continually influencing the structure of woodland vegetation across broad regions of the northern hemisphere. Their feeding affected which branches survived, how sunlight reached lower plants, and where fresh growth emerged after browsing. Once these animals vanished, that extensive layer of vegetation no longer experienced the same constant pressure from gigantic consumers. Some browsing eventually returned through surviving lineages, yet the ecological arrangement had changed. For a considerable interval, much of the energy stored within taller forest foliage remained available to animals that no longer existed. Forests adjusted gradually to the absence of their former architects, producing new balances among plants and herbivores that differed from those established during the Eocene. The change reflected far more than missing species. It altered the movement of energy through entire ecosystems. The disappearance of Andrewsarchus removed another unique function. Its massive skull allowed access to nourishment locked within carcasses that resisted the feeding abilities of other predators. Bones containing marrow and dense connective tissues represented valuable resources after flesh had already been consumed. Following the extinction of Andrewsarchus, no comparably large mammal appeared in Asia with equivalent adaptations for exploiting those remains. A specialized ecological role faded without producing a direct successor. Predator communities changed just as profoundly. Earlier landscapes had supported multiple apex hunters occupying different ecological positions, each relying upon distinct prey, hunting methods, or feeding strategies. That layered structure dissolved across the transition into the Oligocene. Carnivorous mammals certainly remained important members of the recovering ecosystems, although their interactions became less intricate than the elaborate arrangement that had characterized the preceding age. The disappearance of several specialized lineages simplified relationships that had taken millions of years to assemble. Life did not diminish in diversity. Small mammals, adaptable browsing species, rodents, and flexible carnivores expanded across changing environments, creating communities rich in species capable of exploiting varied resources. Biological success increasingly favored versatility instead of extreme specialization. The number of ecological participants remained substantial, yet fewer animals operated at the extraordinary scale once common among the dominant mammals of the Eocene. This shift appears clearly within the fossil record of body size. Average mass among Asia's largest mammals declines across the boundary separating the two epochs, reflecting the disappearance of many colossal herbivores and predators. Only when Paraceratherium eventually attained its immense proportions did the upper limit approach the remarkable scale previously achieved. After that lineage also disappeared during later environmental change, the record declined once more and never again returned to those earlier extremes. The world inherited from the Eocene therefore remained vigorous, productive, and continually evolving. Even so, its biological architecture became less dependent upon enormous specialists connected through tightly woven ecological relationships. The forests, predators, and herbivores that followed belonged to a different kind of stability, one built around flexibility instead of magnitude. The greatest giants had departed, leaving behind landscapes that continued flourishing while carrying a measurable reduction in ecological scale. A lasting reminder that evolution sometimes transforms the character of life without reducing its abundance. Words often carry meanings that extend beyond science. Extinction, in ordinary conversation, can suggest defeat, weakness, or the inability to keep pace with change. The fossil record tells a more measured story. Within the rocks preserving the close of the Eocene, disappearance does not resemble failure. It reflects the relationship between living organisms and the environments that shaped them across immense spans of time. Consider Andrewsarchus. Nothing in the available evidence indicates that a stronger predator emerged to overthrow it. Its lineage vanished before the climatic transformation reached its greatest intensity, leaving no equally specialized successor to occupy the same ecological role. The disappearance, therefore, cannot be understood as a contest won by a superior rival. The conditions supporting such a predator gradually disappeared, and with them went the opportunity for that extraordinary anatomy to remain useful. The history of the brontotheres leads toward the same conclusion from another direction. For approximately 20 million years, they ranked among the most successful giant herbivores ever to inhabit the northern hemisphere. Their fossils appear across two continents, demonstrating sustained abundance, remarkable diversity, and enduring ecological influence. Nothing about that record suggests a poorly adapted lineage. Their extinction followed one of the longest intervals of evolutionary success achieved by any large mammal family. Evolution itself explains why this pattern appears so often throughout Earth's history. Natural selection acts only upon the conditions existing during each generation. It cannot anticipate environments that have not yet developed, nor can it preserve unused adaptations for circumstances lying millions of years in the future. Every successful lineage becomes increasingly refined for the world it inhabits because immediate survival determines which inherited traits continue into the next generation. This process creates an unavoidable relationship between specialization and vulnerability. The more precisely an organism matches its surroundings, the more dependent it becomes upon those surroundings remaining broadly recognizable. That dependence is not an evolutionary mistake. It is the very outcome produced by sustained adaptation across countless generations. The same biological features that maximize survival under familiar conditions inevitably become less effective if those conditions are fundamentally reorganized. The teeth of Embolotherium illustrate this principle with unusual clarity. They represented an elegant solution for processing the leaves and shoots available throughout Eocene forests. Every surface, ridge, and contact point reflected millions of years of gradual refinement. When expanding dry habitats replaced much of that vegetation with tougher plants, the teeth themselves remained exactly as evolution had shaped them. The change occurred entirely outside the animal. Its anatomy no longer matched the food resources surrounding it because the environment had been rewritten. The same principle extended across the wider community of giant mammals. Specialized predators, immense browsers, and other highly adapted species had accumulated characteristics perfectly suited to ecological relationships that endured for millions of years. Climatic transformation altered those relationships more rapidly than evolutionary change could produce equally effective alternatives. Long histories of successful adaptation therefore became increasingly disconnected from the demands of the emerging world. Viewed through this perspective, extinction becomes neither praise nor condemnation. It is the natural outcome of organisms remaining faithful to the environments that created them while those environments continue changing. Every species alive today exists within the same continuing process, carrying adaptations shaped by present conditions instead of future possibilities. The Eocene giants did not vanish because something within them failed. They disappeared because they had become complete answers to ecological questions that the planet eventually stopped asking. The beginning of a new age is often described through the creatures that disappeared, yet it can also be understood by examining those that remained. Survival after the Eocene was not awarded to the largest bodies, the strongest jaws, or the most commanding presence across the landscape. It belonged to animals whose daily needs still matched the resources available after climates, vegetation, and food webs had been fundamentally reorganized. Among the most successful inhabitants of early Oligocene Asia were small rodents and the early members of the lagomorph lineage, relatives of modern rabbits. Their importance grew because they required comparatively little food, reproduced rapidly, and occupied a broad variety of habitats. Seeds, roots, shoots, bark, and many other plant materials could sustain them through changing seasons. When forests gave way to more open environments, these adaptable mammals expanded into ecological opportunities left behind by disappearing specialists. Their success reflected flexibility expressed at nearly every level of biology. Short generation times allowed populations to respond more rapidly to environmental pressures. Small body size reduced daily energy demands, while modest home ranges made scattered food resources sufficient for survival. Instead of depending upon one particular habitat or one narrow category of vegetation, they adjusted to the changing landscapes with comparatively few anatomical constraints. The altered world still provided everything these animals required. The same principle shaped the future of another lineage. Early members of the order that would eventually include wolves, cats, bears, and many other familiar predators had spent much of the Eocene occupying comparatively modest ecological positions. They possessed no overwhelming advantage, while specialized hunters dominated the largest prey. Their strength emerged from dietary breadth. Insects, small vertebrates, fruit, eggs, carrion, and opportunistic hunting all contributed to survival. As earlier food webs became less predictable, that flexibility transformed from an ordinary trait into a decisive advantage. Their expansion did not require the disappearance of every competitor at once. Across successive generations, adaptable carnivorans occupied ecological spaces, becoming increasingly difficult for highly specialized meat eaters to maintain. They exploited a wider assortment of prey and adjusted more readily to open habitats. Characteristics that had once seemed unremarkable gradually became central to survival within ecosystems, still recovering from profound climatic transformation. The hornless rhinoceros lineage illustrates how even modest differences could influence long term history. Earlier members possessed slightly broader dietary tolerance than the giant brontosaurs sharing their environments. That seemingly minor distinction became enormously important once vegetation changed. A lineage capable of feeding from a somewhat wider selection of plants continued evolving, while another, more specialized branch disappeared. Evolutionary outcomes sometimes depended upon differences so subtle that they remained invisible until environmental conditions shifted. This pattern extends far beyond the close of the Eocene. Repeatedly throughout Earth's history, major extinction events preserve the same broad tendency. Generalists commonly persist because they can continue functioning while familiar ecosystems reorganize. Specialists often struggle because their remarkable adaptations remain closely connected to conditions that no longer exist. Neither outcome represents superiority. Each reflects the relationship between inherited biology and the changing character of the surrounding world. The Oligocene inherited landscapes already transformed by the passing of the Eocene giants. Over millions of years, it produced rich ecosystems filled with successful mammals, diverse plant communities, and new evolutionary pathways that eventually shaped later ages. Those environments flourished according to their own rules, although they rarely recreated the extraordinary scale and intricate specialization that had characterized the preceding epoch. Life continued with remarkable resilience, carrying forward countless possibilities while leaving behind a chapter whose greatest giants would never be assembled in quite the same way again. Across the Gobi today, the ground appears spare and weathered, stretching toward distant horizons shaped by wind and stone. It is difficult to imagine that this same landscape once supported towering browsers, immense predators, and forests rich enough to sustain one of the most extraordinary mammal communities Earth has known. The contrast is so complete that the modern desert and the vanished ecosystem seem almost unrelated, although they are chapters of the same continuous history. The land preserving the remains of Andrewsarchus and Embolotherium now experiences some of the harshest seasonal conditions found anywhere in continental Asia. Winter temperatures can fall to minus 40 degrees Celsius or minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. During summer, the surface may rise to 45 degrees Celsius or 113 degrees Fahrenheit. Rainfall remains scarce across much of the region. Vegetation is widely scattered, and comparatively few large mammals inhabit the broad expanses where giant herbivores and predators once moved through productive habitats. The forces responsible for this transformation were never separate from those that shaped the earlier world. The gradual uplift accompanying the collision between the Indian and Eurasian continental plates redirected atmospheric moisture, altered regional climates, and encouraged increasing aridity across Central Asia. Those same geological processes eventually produced the desert landscape covering the fossil beds today. Construction and destruction formed parts of a single sequence, with geology steadily replacing one environment by another across millions of years. That transformation also created an unexpected partnership between natural erosion and scientific discovery. Wind moving across exposed rock has stripped away younger sediments for thousands of years, uncovering portions of the Eocene formations little by little. Long before organized fossil expeditions entered Mongolia, the desert itself had already begun revealing fragments of skeletons hidden beneath the surface. The remarkable discoveries of the early 20th century became possible because natural erosion had patiently performed much of the excavation across timescales far exceeding recorded human history. The process continues without interruption. Each passing season removes another thin layer of sediment from cliffs, gullies, and exposed slopes. Paleontologists returning to familiar localities frequently encounter bones or teeth that had remained concealed during earlier visits. Material buried since the Eocene gradually approaches daylight through countless cycles of freezing, warming, and persistent wind. Every newly exposed fossil represents another small intersection between geological time and human observation, joining discoveries separated by decades while originating from events separated by millions of years. Seen together, the Eocene forest and the modern Gobi reveal one of the most complete environmental reversals preserved anywhere on the planet. Moisture gave way to dryness. Dense vegetation yielded to open desert. Abundant giant mammals disappeared, and biological productivity shifted toward a far less intensive system. Nearly every defining feature of the landscape changed. The transformation extended beyond individual species, reshaping climate, ecology, soils, and the rhythms through which life occupied the region. The desert, therefore, should not be understood as the simple absence of the forests that came before it. It represents the destination reached through an unbroken chain of geological causes, beginning with continental collision many millions of years ago. The same Earth that raised mountains, redirected rainfall, altered ecosystems, and finally covered the resting places of the Eocene giants with drifting sand. Even now, each persistent breath of desert wind carries away another trace of sediment, allowing fragments of that vanished world to emerge once more beneath the open sky. At the center of this entire story rests a single object. After the forests, the giants, the changing climate, and the long succession of vanished ecosystems, everything narrows once more to one weathered skull resting inside a museum collection. It is no longer merely the beginning of a mystery. It has become the measure of everything that has been learned and everything that still remains beyond reach. A living species once carried that skull across the floodplains and forests of Eocene Asia. It belonged to a predator that may have stood at the highest level of any terrestrial mammalian food web ever assembled. Around it existed an ecosystem whose complexity, body sizes, and specialized relationships exceeded those found in comparable land communities today. That immense biological world endured across millions of years, yet from Andrewsarchus itself, only a single skull has entered the scientific record. Since 1923, that fossil has remained in the collections of the American Museum of Natural History. More than a century has passed while successive generations of paleontologists examined its structure with steadily improving techniques. Each advance in anatomy, geology, evolutionary biology, and imaging technology has revealed additional clues about its relationships and probable appearance. Even so, many of the most fundamental questions remain unanswered. Its exact body proportions, hunting behavior, growth pattern, and aspects of its physiology continue to resist confident reconstruction because no additional skeleton has appeared to complete the picture. The absence of another specimen carries scientific meaning of its own. More than 100 years of exploration within the same broad geological formations have yielded extraordinary collections of Eocene mammals, yet Andrewsarchus has remained represented by that single discovery. Such scarcity may indicate that the animal itself was genuinely uncommon across its environment. It may also reflect exceptionally unfavorable conditions for preserving its remains after death. Both explanations could have operated together, leaving an already uncommon predator with only the smallest chance of entering the fossil record. That possibility becomes even more striking when viewed against the incompleteness of fossil preservation itself. Paleontologists estimate that only a small fraction of all species that have ever lived are represented by fossils available for study, perhaps somewhere between 1 and 10%. Countless lineages disappeared without leaving remains that survived burial, erosion, discovery, and scientific recognition. For every remarkable animal known from a single specimen, many more ecologically comparable species may have vanished without preserving any physical trace that can still be found today. The wider reconstruction of Eocene Asia rests upon this incomplete archive. The expanding herbivore lineages, the layered predator communities, the escalating body sizes, and the intricate ecological relationships emerge from fossils representing only a portion of the original living world. Every discovery strengthens the picture while also revealing how much remains absent. The surviving evidence is extensive enough to reconstruct an ecosystem of astonishing richness, yet it still represents only scattered pages preserved from a far larger volume. The remarkable achievement of paleontology is that such fragments can illuminate an entire vanished age. From isolated bones, scattered teeth, and rare skeletons, a coherent history has emerged, describing one of Earth's most extraordinary mammalian worlds. If the portion that remains accessible already reveals forests filled with giants, specialized predators, and evolutionary experiments unlike anything living today, then the unwritten chapters, carried away by time, were almost certainly greater still, resting beyond the reach of even the most patient search. Some numbers describe distance or weight. Others describe time so immense that ordinary intuition can no longer follow them. 45 million years belongs to that second kind. It is a span large enough that familiar measures of memory, history, and civilization gradually lose their meaning. The mind can pronounce the number with ease, yet its true scale remains difficult to hold for more than a passing moment. Comparison offers one way to approach it. The non-avian dinosaurs disappeared approximately 66 million years ago. Anatomically modern humans appeared only about 300,000 years ago. Recorded human history extends for roughly 5,000 years. Each of those intervals feels enormous when viewed through human experience. Against 45 million years, however, even the longest chapters of our own story occupy only the smallest fraction of a much broader geological narrative. That difference is more than a matter of arithmetic. A human lifetime may seem long because it contains memories, relationships, and change that unfold from birth to old age. 45 million years belongs to an entirely different category of duration. Across such intervals, mountain ranges rise, climates reorganize, coastlines migrate, and ecosystems are assembled before gradually giving way to new ones. Geological time does not merely stretch history. It creates conditions in which entirely different worlds become possible. When Andrew Sarkis crossed the forests of Eocene Asia, none of humanity's familiar landmarks existed. During the 45 million years that followed, the primate lineage diversified into many branches. Numerous members of the human family appeared and disappeared. Our own species eventually emerged, spread across the continents, developed agriculture, founded settlements, built cities, explored the oceans, observed the heavens, and recorded its experiences through language, art, philosophy, science, and music. Every civilization, remembered by history, completed its entire existence within that single interval. Throughout all of those changes, the skull remained enclosed within sediment beneath the changing landscape. Layers accumulated above it, then gradually wore away. Forest vegetation yielded to environments of increasing dryness until the region eventually became desert. Countless generations of animals lived and vanished overhead without disturbing the fossil resting below. Long before the first written words appeared anywhere on Earth, that specimen had already completed an incomparably longer journey through geological time than any human object has yet experienced. This perspective reveals why paleontology depends upon patience measured differently from ordinary life. Evolution operates through countless generations, responding to changing environments, producing gradual transformations that only become visible across immense intervals. Geological processes shaping continents, climates, and ecosystems follow similar rhythms. Human observation occupies only a brief moment within those continuing changes, arriving near the end of stories that began long before our own lineage existed. The Eocene giants therefore remind us that the present arrangement of life is neither permanent nor inevitable. The forests supporting immense mammals once seemed as established as the environments surrounding us today. They endured across millions of years before yielding to different conditions. Another sequence eventually replaced them, just as future worlds will emerge from the landscapes now familiar to us. Deep time places every living community within that continuing succession, revealing that the planet we inhabit is not the final expression of Earth, but one temporary configuration among many, shaped by processes that extend far beyond the limits of human history. The story of the Eocene ultimately reaches beyond the identity of any single species. It becomes an illustration of what living systems can achieve when environmental conditions remain favorable across immense stretches of geological time. The remarkable animals of Asia were expressions of the same evolutionary principles that continue shaping life today. Their difference lay in the world surrounding them and in the extraordinary length of time that world remained capable of refining their descendants. Every creature encountered along this journey carried the accumulated influence of countless generations. The broad skull of Andrewsarchus reflected inherited traits preserved through repeated success. The distinctive cranial structure of Embolotherium emerged through gradual modification across ancestral populations. The slicing teeth of the hyaenodonts became increasingly effective because individuals possessing slight advantages left more descendants than those with less efficient anatomy. The immense bodies of the Brontotheres arose through the repeated preservation of characteristics favoring survival and reproduction within their particular environments. Nothing in this progression required planning or intention. Each generation inherited small differences, and natural selection determined which of those differences continued into the future. Given enough time, those gradual adjustments produced outcomes that appear astonishing when viewed from the present. Approximately 20 million years of relatively stable greenhouse conditions allowed evolutionary change to accumulate without interruption across many lineages. Ecological relationships became increasingly specialized. Body sizes expanded into forms unmatched among later land, mammals, and predators, herbivores, and scavengers developed characteristics closely linked to one another. The resulting ecosystem possessed a combination of scale and complexity with no close equivalent among living terrestrial communities. That achievement reveals an important feature of biology itself. There is no permanent limit defining how large animals must become, how intricate food webs may grow, or how specialized an adaptation can be. Such characteristics emerge from interactions between organisms and their surroundings. Alter the conditions, maintain them across sufficient time, and evolution follows different pathways. The living world does not move toward a predetermined destination. It continually explores possibilities permitted by the environments in which life unfolds. Modern ecosystems, therefore, should never be mistaken for a universal standard. The mammals, birds, reptiles, insects, and flowering plants surrounding us today represent one successful arrangement shaped by present climates, continental positions, atmospheric composition, and ecological relationships. During the Eocene, many of those underlying conditions differed substantially. Using the same evolutionary processes observed throughout biology, life assembled communities unlike those existing now. The governing principles remained constant even as the outcomes diverged in remarkable ways. This perspective reaches beyond paleontology into a broader understanding of Earth's history. Every geological age inherits the consequences of those preceding it while creating opportunities unavailable before. New climates encourage different adaptations. Changing landscapes reshape ecological interactions. Evolution continues, responding to each new combination without preserving any preferred design or favored destination. Diversity emerges through continual adjustment to changing circumstances, producing worlds that often surprise those who study them millions of years later. The Eocene giants remain among the clearest reminders of that expansive, creative range. Their existence demonstrates that nature contains possibilities extending far beyond the boundaries suggested by the present day. The forests of Eocene Asia, their immense mammals, and their intricate ecological relationships were every bit as authentic as the living world surrounding us now. They reveal that our familiar planet is one moment within an unfolding history whose potential has always been broader than any single age can display. One thoughtful exercise remains after following the evidence through the rise and decline of the Eocene giants. It begins with a world that never came to pass. Imagine that global cooling never strengthened, permanent ice sheets never expanded, and the forests of Asia retained the warm conditions that had supported millions of years of uninterrupted evolution. Such a possibility cannot be tested directly, yet the fossil record allows careful consideration of where those evolutionary paths may have continued. Nothing preserved within the late Eocene formations suggests that the major mammalian lineages had reached a final destination. The brontotheres continued exhibiting increasing body size across successive species. The hornless rhinoceros lineage, likewise, showed an ongoing tendency toward larger forms that would continue beyond the boundary for millions of years. Predator communities still contained remarkable diversity, with different hunters occupying distinct ecological roles. Evolutionary change remained active, revealing no unmistakable evidence that further enlargement or specialization had become impossible. The history of life provides useful perspective without supplying a definite answer. Earlier in Earth's past, the largest land-dwelling dinosaurs achieved body masses estimated between 70 and 80 metric tons. Mammals during the Eocene had entered their own prolonged expansion, although they remained well below those extraordinary dimensions. Their increasing size ended because environmental conditions changed, not because the fossil record clearly demonstrates an unavoidable biological ceiling had already been encountered. An uninterrupted greenhouse world therefore leaves open intriguing possibilities. Continued environmental stability might have supported mammals exceeding every size reached by known members of their class. Equally plausible is another outcome in which physiological demands involving circulation, respiration, reproduction, or energy balance gradually imposed practical limits that evolution could not easily overcome. Those boundaries, if they existed, remain unknown because the environmental conditions capable of exploring them disappeared before the experiment could continue. Such speculation also carries another consequence, one reaching far beyond the fate of giant mammals. The cooling climates and ecological restructuring following the Eocene opened opportunities for adaptable species occupying changing environments. Small, flexible primates belonged among the lineages able to persist through those transitions. Across immense spans of subsequent time, their descendants diversified into many branches, eventually including the lineage from which humanity emerged. The environmental upheaval closing one evolutionary chapter helped create the conditions permitting another to unfold. Within that perspective, the Eocene giants and the eventual appearance of humans become outcomes associated with different planetary circumstances. A world continuing to favor increasingly specialized forest ecosystems would have encouraged one collection of evolutionary possibilities. The cooler, more variable conditions that actually developed encouraged another. Both followed the same natural processes of inheritance and selection, responding faithfully to the opportunities available within their respective environments. No hidden intention guided either outcome. Geological change did not reshape climates in preparation for humanity, nor did evolution strive toward any predetermined destination. Continental movement altered atmospheric circulation. Ecosystems responded, species adapted or disappeared, and later lineages inherited the opportunities left behind. The sequence unfolded through ordinary natural processes operating across extraordinary lengths of time. Seen from that broader viewpoint, our own existence belongs to the same chain of events that ended the age of the Eocene giants. The changing world that closed one remarkable biological chapter also opened another, each arising from conditions that made the other increasingly unlikely. Earth's history preserves both possibilities, not as competing purposes, but as different expressions of a planet whose living landscapes have always been shaped by continual change. Loss can be measured in more than the disappearance of individual species. Sometimes it is measured in entire ways that life once organized itself, combinations of anatomy, behavior, and ecology that emerged only once before passing forever into Earth's history. The Eocene of Asia preserves one of those vanished worlds, leaving behind scattered evidence of a biological richness that can never be observed directly again. Within that world lived the largest carnivorous land mammal presently known to science. Andrewsarchus occupied a place unlike any predator living today, shaped by ecological relationships that no longer exist. Across millions of years, nearly every trace of that remarkable animal disappeared. The immense body vanished. The muscles, skin, and movement faded beyond recovery. One skull remained to testify that such a creature once shared the forests of Eocene Asia with countless other forms of life now equally absent. Those forests also supported Embolotherium, an animal whose broad cranial structure almost certainly served purposes extending beyond defense alone. Evidence suggests that its distinctive horn allowed low-frequency sounds to travel efficiently through dense vegetation, helping widely separated members of a herd remain connected across landscapes where vision was often limited. The lineage disappeared completely. No close descendant survives, and no modern terrestrial mammal occupies precisely the same ecological role with the same extraordinary anatomical solution. The predators surrounding Andrewsarchus formed another pattern that gradually dissolved. Different hunters specialized upon different opportunities while sharing the same broad environment. Competition encouraged increasing refinement instead of uniformity, producing a community in which several dominant carnivores coexisted through ecological separation. Across roughly 4 million years, those relationships unraveled as climates shifted and habitats changed. Each disappearance simplified the network until the distinctive predator guild ceased to exist altogether, leaving no later land ecosystem with an equivalent arrangement. The hornless rhinoceros lineage carried another remarkable story beyond the close of the Eocene. Given additional millions of years after the environmental transition, it eventually produced the greatest land mammal known from the fossil record. Even that achievement proved temporary. The lineage ultimately vanished as changing vegetation and climates transformed the landscapes upon which it depended. Its enormous descendants survive only through fossils preserving fragments of a once successful evolutionary experiment. None of these histories can be repeated because the circumstances that generated them have disappeared as well. Evolution continues shaping life across the planet, yet it always works with the conditions available at a particular moment. The warm forests, atmospheric patterns, continental positions, and ecological relationships that supported the Eocene giants belong to one specific interval of Earth's past. Those circumstances have given way to others, and the pathways they once opened have closed with them. Today, the Gobi extends across ground that once supported those vanished communities. The mountains influencing the region continue their gradual rise, reshaping landscapes through processes still unfolding across geological time. The forests nourishing Andrewsarchus, Embolotherium, the great predator guild, and the immense browsing mammals disappeared approximately 34 million years ago. Their return belongs outside the range of realistic geological expectation. What endures is the fossil record itself, preserving enough evidence to recognize the outlines of that forgotten world while leaving many details forever beyond recovery. Its incompleteness cannot be repaired because countless organisms vanished without preserving their stories in stone. Even so, the fragments that remain reveal a chapter of life's history whose absence carries lasting significance, reminding us that Earth has already held living worlds far different from the ones surrounding us now, and that many of their greatest achievements survive only as echoes preserved within rock. The close of the Eocene in Asia did not arrive as a single dramatic day marked by fire across the horizon or a collision from space. Its conclusion unfolded through changes so gradual that no living creature could have recognized them while they were taking place. Year followed year, generation followed generation, and the living world adjusted repeatedly to conditions that seemed only slightly different from those that came before. A young brontothere entered life within landscapes that carried a little less moisture than those experienced by its parents. Its offspring encountered another small shift. Forests changed almost beyond notice within the span of a single lifetime, yet those tiny differences accumulated across hundreds of thousands of years. No individual animal possessed memory extending far enough to compare the changing world with the one that had existed many generations earlier. Every newborn accepted its surroundings as ordinary because they were the only surroundings it had ever known. Other lineages experienced comparable transitions. Andrewsarchus depended upon abundant prey distributed across productive habitats. As vegetation gradually changed, herbivore communities shifted in both number and distribution. Hunting territories likely became less favorable over immense spans of time, reducing opportunities that had once been more dependable. The high anodonts likewise faced ecosystems becoming progressively less intricate as environmental diversity declined. Species disappeared, one after another, instead of all at once, each loss reducing the variety that had once characterized the predator community. Entelodonts also encountered changing landscapes in which the concentrations of large carcasses supporting their way of life became increasingly uncommon. encouraging gradual changes in body size and ecological role approaching the Oligocene. None of these animals understood that they belonged to declining lineages. They responded only to immediate circumstances, finding food, avoiding danger, reproducing, and passing inherited traits to the following generation. Evolution always operates within the present. It cannot compare distant ages, anticipate future climates, or preserve conditions that no longer exist. Each generation lives within the environment it receives, regardless of how different that environment may be from the one experienced by distant ancestors. Viewed across geological time, such gradual transformations become unmistakable. Small environmental adjustments accumulate until they eventually carry ecosystems across thresholds, separating one stable state from another. Those boundaries often remain invisible while they are being approached. Only after they have been crossed does the magnitude of accumulated change become fully apparent. The transition appears obvious in retrospect, even though it emerged through countless ordinary moments that individually revealed very little. The Eocene of Asia reached one of those thresholds. The warm forests gave way to different landscapes. Atmospheric circulation changed. Ecological networks that had supported extraordinary mammals unraveled through persistent environmental pressure. By the time the process concluded, the biological world that had flourished for millions of years no longer existed in recognizable form. Its disappearance was complete. The combination of climate, vegetation, and ecological relationships responsible for those remarkable animals belongs entirely to Earth's past. The species vanished. Many of the specialized roles they occupied remain without close counterparts among living terrestrial communities. What survives today is an incomplete geological archive preserving scattered fragments of that former world. Those fragments reveal that most endings are written gradually through changes too small to notice in a single lifetime, yet large enough across deep time to transform an entire planet into something fundamentally different from what came before. Resting within a museum collection is a piece of fossilized bone measuring approximately 83 centimeters, which is about 33 feet. It occupies no grand landscape and commands no living territory. Visitors can walk past it in moments, yet this single object carries the entire scientific presence of an animal that otherwise would have vanished without a trace. Everything known about Andrewsarchus begins with those preserved bones and returns to them again. Every reconstruction presented by paleontologists depends upon that specimen. Estimates of body size originate from the proportions of its skull. Interpretations of bite force arise from muscle attachment surfaces preserved across fossilized bone. Ideas concerning feeding habits, ecological position, and evolutionary relationships all flow through the anatomy visible within that solitary discovery. Remove the skull from the record, and Andrewsarchus itself would disappear from scientific understanding. No second skeleton would remain to preserve its existence, and no written memory could replace what geology failed to save. That reality extends beyond the history of one remarkable predator. The specimen invites reflection upon the nature of evidence itself. How can an animal occupying such an important ecological role become represented by only a single surviving object? The question reaches beyond the boundaries of paleontology because it concerns the relationship between the living world and the extraordinarily selective process through which fragments of that world become fossils. For any organism to enter the geological record, an unlikely sequence of events must unfold. After death, remains must be buried rapidly before weather, scavengers, and decay destroy them. Burial usually needs to occur within sediment containing little available oxygen, slowing the activity of organisms that would otherwise consume or scatter the bones. Groundwater carrying dissolved minerals gradually infiltrates the buried skeleton, replacing or filling microscopic spaces through a process known as permineralization. Those fossilized remains must then survive millions of years without being crushed, melted, dissolved, or eroded away before eventually becoming exposed, where someone is able to recognize their significance. Most living things never experience that sequence. Countless animals die where their remains disappear within days, months, or years. Entire populations can flourish across enormous landscapes without leaving fossils that endure into the distant future. The overwhelming majority of organisms that have lived on Earth therefore vanished without contributing a single specimen to the geological archive studied today. The forests of Eocene Asia must have contained innumerable creatures whose existence can now be inferred only indirectly. Many predators, browsing mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, insects, and flowering plants completed their histories without preserving recognizable traces. Even the species represented within museum collections almost certainly survive as only a minute sample of their original abundance. The ecological networks reconstructed from fossils therefore emerge from a remarkably limited collection of surviving evidence. Seen in that light, the Andrewsarchus skull becomes more than the preserved remains of one predator. It represents the improbable survival of a story that almost disappeared entirely. Everything absent from the fossil record forms a far greater volume than everything preserved within it. Across approximately 45 million years, nearly every footprint, every hunt, every season of birth, and every generation vanished beyond recovery. The skull endured where almost everything else was lost. It is neither the complete history of Andrewsarchus nor the complete history of its world. It is the surviving fragment through which an immeasurably larger reality can still be glimpsed, while reminding us that much of life's deepest past remains permanently beyond observation. As this long passage through the Eocene approaches its final horizon, one thought remains after the names, the fossils, and the vanished landscapes settle into place. The greatest inheritance of those remarkable animals is not contained within their size alone. Their deeper significance rests in what they reveal about the creative reach of life when a planet provides favorable conditions across immense spans of geological time. The giants of Eocene Asia emerged within ecosystems where ecological opportunities were abundant and interactions between species unfolded continuously through millions of years. Herbivores competed with one another while responding to changing vegetation. Predators adapted alongside their prey. Browsers, scavengers, omnivores, and smaller mammals occupied countless interconnected roles. Every successful adaptation influenced another lineage somewhere within the same living network. Natural selection acted simultaneously across entire communities, gradually refining bodies, behaviors, and ecological relationships until many organisms occupied forms that appear extraordinary from a modern perspective. Their remarkable anatomy therefore reflected more than isolated evolutionary success. Andrewsarchus represented one expression of a productive predator community. The immense brontothers reflected prolonged ecological stability, supporting repeated increases in body size. Other specialized mammals filled roles shaped through equally persistent interactions with plants, competitors, parasites, and changing habitats. None existed independently. Each lineage formed part of a biological system operating with remarkable continuity across deep time, allowing evolutionary processes to explore possibilities unavailable under less stable circumstances. Although those particular conditions disappeared, the underlying process did not. Evolution continues wherever living organisms reproduce, compete, cooperate, and pass inherited variation from one generation to the next. Every forest, grassland, coral reef, wetland, mountain valley, and desert supports that same ongoing process today. Different climates produce different opportunities. Different landscapes encourage different adaptations. The scale may vary dramatically, yet the fundamental biological principles remain unchanged across every ecosystem on Earth. That continuity gives the Eocene fossils their lasting importance. They demonstrate what becomes possible when abundant warmth, reliable moisture, connected habitats, and immense periods of stability persist together. Under those circumstances, ecological interactions can continue accumulating across millions of years, gradually producing forms that later ages may never repeat. The extraordinary mammals of Eocene Asia were one historical expression of that broader capacity, shaped by environmental circumstances unique to their own geological chapter. The disappearance of those favorable conditions closed certain evolutionary pathways while opening others. Many possibilities once available no longer exist because the climates and habitats supporting them have changed beyond recognition. Even so, the creative potential responsible for those ancient lineages has never vanished. It remains active within every population of living organisms, continually responding to present circumstances with the same patient accumulation of inherited change that shaped Earth's past. Seen across the full sweep of geological history, the living world surrounding us becomes one temporary expression among many. Present ecosystems are neither the greatest nor the smallest outcomes that evolution can produce. They represent what current environmental conditions permit at this particular moment. Earlier ages permitted different experiments, and future ages will almost certainly permit others that remain impossible to predict. The monsters of the Eocene, therefore, leave behind something greater than fossil bones. They preserve evidence that life's capacity extends well beyond the familiar boundaries of the present day. Their world has vanished, yet the evolutionary principles that shaped it continue working without pause, carrying forward the same enduring potential that, under the right combination of time and circumstance, once filled Asia with creatures unlike anything alive today. Approximately 45 million years ago, where the Gobi Desert now stretches beneath open skies, an immense predator crossed warm forest ground and left behind a single skull that would outlast its entire world. Almost everything surrounding that animal disappeared. Leaves returned to soil. Rivers altered their courses. Generations followed one another until no living witness remained. Across all of that passing time, one fragment endured long enough to carry a distant memory into the present. That predator belonged to an ecosystem unlike any surviving on land today. It shared its surroundings with mammals shaped by evolutionary histories that reached extraordinary forms through millions of years of uninterrupted change. Some browsed at towering heights. Others communicated across forests using resonant structures unlike those of any living species. Multiple dominant predators occupied different ecological roles within the same landscapes. Every lineage reflected the particular conditions that had nurtured it across an immense span of geological time. Those conditions did not remain unchanged forever. The continued rise of the Himalayas altered atmospheric circulation. Moisture gradually shifted toward different regions. Forests contracted as climates followed new directions. Each generation entered a landscape only slightly different from the one before. carrying inherited adaptations into environments becoming progressively less favorable. The transformation unfolded across spans so great that no individual life could perceive its full extent. Eventually, there came a final generation for every lineage, although none could have recognized it as such. Andrewsarchus disappeared together with the world that had sustained its way of life. The largest carnivorous land mammal, presently known from the fossil record, left no descendants and no second specimen to preserve its story. Its existence now depends upon a solitary skull, remarkable both for what it reveals and for everything it cannot reveal about the living animal that once carried it. Embolotherium also passed into Earth's history. The resonant anatomy that once carried low-frequency calls through forest vegetation has no direct living counterpart. The ecological setting that shaped such communication vanished with the forests themselves. The sounds that may have echoed between distant herds faded long before any human ear existed to hear them, leaving only fossilized bone from which careful scientific inference can begin. The hyenodonts likewise occupied their place for roughly 20 million years before environmental change gradually dissolved the ecological relationships supporting their diversity. One species disappeared, then another, until the lineage itself belonged entirely to the past. The hornless rhinoceros lineage continued farther, ultimately producing Paraceratherium, the greatest land mammal known from Earth's history. For approximately 11 million years, it persisted beyond the Eocene, browsing above the reach of predators before changing vegetation removed the last habitats capable of sustaining such immense bodies. The lost age of Asia was neither legend nor imagination. Its forests existed. Its giant mammals lived, reproduced, competed, and disappeared through the ordinary workings of nature. The planet that shaped them changed, and the creatures fashioned by those earlier conditions changed with it until nothing living remained. Their fossils preserve more than remarkable animals. They preserve a reminder that every form of life belongs to the world that created it, and that when the conditions supporting that world finally pass away, even the greatest among its inhabitants pass into history beside it.